This is the story of a man who never really fit inside the word actor because the word is too small for him. My name is Jack Nicholson. I was born John Joseph Nicholson on April 22nd, 1937, in Neptune City, New Jersey. But the strange thing is, for a long time, I didn't really know who I was. Most people grow up with a pretty clear idea of who their parents are. For me, that truth was a secret, wrapped in good intentions and a bit of shame, like a family heirloom locked in the attic. The woman I grew up thinking was my mother was named Ethel May. She was a showgirl, a beauty, Irish Catholic, a woman with a presence. And the woman I called my sister was June, wild, talented, a dancer, a dreamer. But the truth, which I would not learn until I was well into my 30s, was that June was my mother, and Ethel was my grandmother. They hid that from me and from the world, probably to protect June, who had become pregnant very young, probably to protect the family from gossip, from scandal, from the judgment of small-town America in the 1930s. So I spent my childhood in a house built on a beautiful lie. Neptune City, Manasquan, New Jersey, it's not Hollywood. It was diners, small streets, church bells, and the ocean. The Atlantic was always there, this huge, restless thing, and I think that does something to a kid. You grow up staring at something that big, and you either feel very small, or you get hungry to be just as big. I wasn't a particularly good boy. I was a bit of a punk. I got into fights, I ran my mouth. I had what teachers would call an attitude problem, and what I would later call a career asset. I was smart, but I didn't really care about school. I cared about people. I watched them, I studied them, I mimicked, I joked, I exaggerated. I watched how expressions changed in a split second, how a person could say one thing and feel another. Without knowing it, I was practicing. At Manasquan High School, I was voted class clown. People thought that was a joke. It wasn't. Being funny was my first real job. Comedy is survival. You either laugh or you cry. I chose to make other people laugh and keep my own tears to myself. We were not rich. There were bills, there was stress, there was alcohol around, there were grown-up problems that spill into a kid's world. You learn how to dodge emotional punches. You learn how to speak quickly, deflect, charm. Those skills would one day become the rhythms of my characters. The guy smiling while the world falls apart behind him. The laugh with the knife hidden in it. As a kid, I also discovered something important. I liked attention. When I told a story, when I cracked a line, when I walked into a room and people turned, that lit me up. It made me feel real, like I existed in sharper focus. That's not nobility, that's just honesty. A lot of actors are that kid who needed more love, louder love, brighter love. I was no exception. After high school, I went to Los Angeles, not because of some poetic calling, but because I followed people, followed work, followed a pull I couldn't quite name. The truth is, I didn't arrive in Hollywood like a hero in a movie. I arrived like a kid looking for something, a job, a life, a reason. I got work at MGM as an office boy. Picture that for a second. The future 3-time Academy Award winner running around delivering mail in a studio lot, watching the legends walk by, carrying contracts and memos instead of scripts. I'd walk past sound stages, past lights and cables, and doorways with names on them. It was like standing outside the temple, barefoot, not yet allowed inside. But I watched everything. I paid attention. I learned that stars are just people with better lighting, good writers, and ruthless ambition. I also learned something else. I didn't want to push paper. I wanted to be in front of the camera, inside the story. Now, the first people to give me a shot were not the big studios. It was Roger Corman and the world of B-movies. Cheap, fast, wild. That's where I grew up as an actor. The people who only know me from The Shining or As Good as It Gets don't always realize that. For a good long while, I was a B-movie guy. I was in movies with titles like The Crybaby Killer, Little Shop of Horrors, The Raven, The Terror. We shot fast, we shot cheap, we shot sometimes with no permits and barely a script. This was filmmaking a street fighting. You improvise, you hustle, you don't get precious. I didn't become a star overnight. Years went by. I acted, I wrote a little, I hung around the margins. I spent nearly a decade as an almost nobody, a working actor but not a known one. I tasted the bitterness of being close to the party but never truly invited inside. And then, in 1969, the seismic shift. Easy Rider. I didn't write it, I didn't direct it, I wasn't the star. But I walked into that film like a man walking into his destiny without even knowing it. I played George Hansen, an alcoholic lawyer with broken charm and tragic eyes. A misfit among misfits. He's funny, but there's a sadness. He's hanging on by jokes and booze. I knew that guy. I'd seen him in bars. I'd seen him in mirrors. When Easy Rider came out, something happened. The counterculture loved it. Hollywood was forced to notice it. And my performance suddenly made sense to a lot of people, in a way I'd been trying to make sense for years. I got my first Oscar nomination. I was still the same guy inside, but now, outside, the world was paying attention. After that, the 1970s were my crucible, my big bang. Film after film, role after role, it became clear that my work wasn't about playing safe, pretty, likable men. I was drawn to broken souls, wounded egos, charming scoundrels with storm clouds in their eyes. 5 Easy Pieces in 1970, Bobby Dupia, a man who can play classical piano but works on an oil rig, a guy running from his own talent, his own family, his own heart. He's angry, he's tender, he's lost. That film gave me one of the scenes people still talk about decades later, the diner scene. A simple order of toast turned into a declaration of war against stupid rules and quiet oppression. I want you to hold it between your knees. That line wasn't just a joke. It was defiance. It was a working man telling the world, I refuse to fit into your little boxes. People loved that scene because everyone's wanted to explode at some small indignity and say, I will not behave. Then there was Carnal Knowledge, The Last Detail, Chinatown. Let's talk Chinatown. Roman Polanski directs it. Robert Towne writes it. I play J.J. Gittes, a private eye in a corrupt, sunlit Los Angeles where rot hides under the brightness. Gittes is cocky, stylish, world-weary, but not as cynical as he thinks. He still believes maybe, just maybe, he can do the right thing and it will matter. The ending of that film is one of the darkest gut punches in American cinema. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. That line became iconic because it wasn't just about a place. It was about the way the world works. I played a guy who discovers he is smaller than the evil he is facing. That hurts. But in that hurt, in that defeated expression, people saw something human and honest. I poured myself into these men. And here's the thing, they were not heroes in capes. They were not nice guys who always did the right thing. They were flawed, selfish, lustful, angry, afraid. They were, in a word, human. People recognized themselves in that. Then came 1975. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Randall Patrick McMurphy. A man who fakes insanity to get out of hard labor and ends up in a mental institution only to become the living spark of rebellion inside a machine of control. McMurphy is dirty, funny, dangerous, alive. He taunts the system, befriends the broken, and ultimately sacrifices everything. I knew, reading that script, this was not just a movie. This was a howl at the sky. We shot in a real mental hospital with real patients. The line between acting and life blurred. I wasn't playing a concept. I was playing a man trying to keep his soul intact inside a bureaucracy that wanted to flatten him. When I shot that final scene, the lobotomized McMurphy, scarred, stolen from himself, there was a silence on set that didn't feel like a movie set. It felt like a wake. Then Chief lifts the sink, smashes the window, and runs. That was the dream. Even if you're crushed, maybe someone else escapes because of you. I won my first Academy Award for that performance, Best Actor. Suddenly, the mailroom kid was at the top of the mountain. But here's a thing people don't always know. Success doesn't make you whole. It just makes you louder. The same insecurities, the same hungers, the same demons, they all show up to the party. They just dress better. When people talk about my life, they often jump to The Shining, Stanley Kubrick, Stephen King, A Haunted Hotel. Here's Johnny swinging the axe through the bathroom door. That film has become a permanent part of pop culture, of nightmares, of Halloween costumes. Working with Kubrick was a marathon run at a sprinter's pace. He demanded take after take, detail after detail. Some people hated that. I found it exhausting, maddening, and secretly thrilling. There's a psychoanalytic truth buried in The Shining. A man losing his soul in isolation, in alcoholism, in the prison of his own unfulfilled dreams. I knew some of that from the inside. That's why the madness feels real. It's not just a horror performance. It's a breakdown. The little things, the eyebrow, the grin, the way the voice shifts from playful to predatory. People think those are Jack Nicholson tricks. They're not tricks. They're lightning rods. They're exaggerations of real impulses. We all have dark thoughts. An actor like me just gets paid to show them. Of course, the public image grew. The sunglasses, the devilish grin, the courtside seat at Lakers games. That's another part of my story. Basketball wasn't just a hobby. The Los Angeles Lakers were a kind of second religion. I sat courtside for decades, through the Showtime era, through Magic and Kareem, through Kobe and Shaq. I shouted at refs. I got into it with opposing players. It was my place to be a fan, not a star. I wasn't Jack Nicholson, the actor there. I was Jack, the guy who loves the game. But of course, cameras found me, and that courtside seat became part of the Nicholson mythology. Now, let's wander into the less talked about rooms of my life. I never married, but I loved many women. That's the polite way to say it. My love life has been public, messy, colorful. Angelica Huston, for one. Our relationship lasted nearly 17 years, on and off. She's one of the great loves of my life. Brilliant, magnetic, fierce. We hurt each other, we adored each other. We kept drifting back. That's not a fairy tale, but it was real. I have multiple children with multiple women. That's not something I necessarily wear as a badge of honor, but it's the truth. Fatherhood in my life is not tidy. It's complicated. There are kids who grew up with me more present, and some who didn't. That's a part of my story that doesn't fit neatly into a poster or an award speech. Being Jack Nicholson the persona and Jack the father were not always compatible jobs. I felt guilt about that. I've also felt pride in my children, in their lives, their work, their resilience. Here's another lesser-known piece. I wasn't just an actor. I co-wrote scripts. I produced things. I cared about the machinery of filmmaking, not just the spotlight. I helped write Head, a film for the Monkees. It's a weird, psychedelic piece of 1960s collage. It didn't make a huge splash, but it's one of those secret artifacts that shows how my brain liked to play with form and structure. I also had a quiet little interest in art, painting, collecting, looking. I went to galleries, I befriended artists. I saw in visual art the same thing I tried to do on screen, capture a feeling that can't be explained in simple words. You might not read about that in gossip columns, but those hours in front of paintings and sculptures were part of how I fed my soul. Back to the films. In the 1980s and 1990s, my career wasn't just about dark, tortured men. I embraced the outrageous, the comic, the seductive. I played the devil himself in The Witches of Eastwick, opposite Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, Susan Sarandon. My Daryl Van Horn was a walking sin. Charming, grotesque, magnetic, vulgar. I relished it. There was a freedom in playing someone who doesn't care about rules or guilt. And then, 1989, Tim Burton's Batman. I played the Joker. Now, that role has gone on to be reinvented by others, but at the time, a comic book movie was not a guaranteed prestige project or cultural earthquake. I approached the Joker as a gangster clown, a lunatic showman, a man whose cruelty is almost theatrical. I painted my face, put on that purple suit, and dove in. People remember that cackle, that smiling menace. Playing the Joker let me blend all my favorite things: humor, danger, style, and a little bit of madness. It also paid very, very well. Let's not pretend the business side doesn't matter. That movie made me a fortune beyond my wildest early dreams. In A Few Good Men, I said one of the most repeated lines in movie history: "You can't handle the truth." Colonel Jessup, a man who believes that his brutal version of the world is necessary, even noble. I didn't play him as a cartoon villain. I played him as a man who believes he is right. That's the scariest kind of villain, the righteous one. By the time As Good as It Gets came along in 1997, I was an institution. But I didn't want to just repeat myself. In that film, I played Melvin Udall, a romance novelist with obsessive-compulsive disorder, a razor tongue, and a heart buried under miles of barbed wire. On paper, he's almost unlikable. On screen, the job was to let audiences see the man trying, failing, trying again to be better, to care, to love. That performance won me my 3rd Academy Award. People saw in Melvin a reflection of their own worst instincts and their desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could still reach out and connect. Winning 3 Oscars puts you in a very small club. That's trivia. What it really means is that for many years, I was consistently able to connect with audiences and critics alike, to move people, to disturb them, to entertain them. Now, let's talk about age, decline, retreat, words people don't like. In the 2000s, I kept working. About Schmitz, where I played a man retiring into a quiet, terrifying emptiness, forced to reckon with the smallness of his life. That film stripped me of the big gestures, the swagger. It made me small, ordinary, lost, and people were moved by that vulnerability. Then, Something's Gotta Give, a romantic comedy that let me play a version of myself, an aging bachelor who spent his life with younger women, suddenly falling hard for a woman his own age, played by Diane Keaton. There was truth in that, humor too, and a little bit of confession. I kept sitting courtside. I kept cracking lines on red carpets. The sunglasses stayed, the grin stayed, but behind that, I was getting older, like everyone else. At a certain point, I stepped away from acting. I didn't announce a grand retirement with fireworks. I simply stopped taking new roles after How Do You Know in 2010, aside from small things like presenting at the Oscars or popping up in the crowd. People speculated. Memory issues? Health problems? Was I gone? Fading? Here's the truth. I got tired. I had spent decades giving myself to the screen, living other people's lives, inhabiting their madness, their sorrow, their lust. There comes a time where you want to be yourself, even if you're not entirely sure who that is without the script pages. There are quiet facts. I enjoy my home. I enjoy privacy more than I used to. Fame is loud. Age invites silence. I've turned down roles you've probably heard about, parts people thought would bring me back. But you reach a point where you have to ask, do I need to prove anything else? For me, the answer was no. The unknown facts, the things that don't always make it into the illusion, are simple details. I used to spend long hours alone reading, not just scripts, but philosophy, psychology, history. I had this hunger to understand why people do what they do. That informed every character. I was fascinated by power. Who has it, who doesn't, how it's used, how it corrupts. A lot of my roles are about men with power discovering their limits. I felt, for much of my life, like an outsider, even at the center of the party. That sense of being the odd one out never left. It stayed with me on every set, at every award show, even when I was the most famous person in the room. When I finally learned, at 37, that the woman I thought was my sister was my mother, it shook me. I found out because a journalist dug it up in old records. Can you imagine discovering that in print, like a twist in a movie that happens to be your life? I didn't rage publicly, I didn't crumble publicly, but inside, it rearranged the furniture. It explained the distance, the secrets, the strange emotional echoes of my youth. I said, publicly, that I wasn't angry, that Ethel and June had done the best they could with the world they lived in. And that's true. But the ghost of that lie stayed with me. It made me more interested in characters whose identities are shaky, uncertain, wounded. I am not a perfect man. I have hurt people. I have disappointed people. I have also tried, in my way, to be generous, to be kind, to be fully present when it mattered. I've helped friends quietly. I've supported younger actors, directors, artists, sometimes without a press release, without a photograph. The truth underneath the myth is this. I was a boy from New Jersey who grew up confused about who his mother was, who liked to make people laugh, who hid his pain behind jokes and swagger, who walked into Hollywood with nothing guaranteed, who spent nearly a decade in cheap movies before being recognized, who became an icon without ever really planning to, who played madmen and martyrs, lovers and liars, killers and clowns. I am the sum of all those performances, and also the quiet mornings alone, the late nights watching basketball, the arguments in motel rooms, the laughs in diners, the cigarettes smoked in the small hours, the love affairs that almost worked, and the ones that never had a chance. If my life were a movie, people would say the character is too big, too exaggerated. No one grins like that. No one lives like that. No one survives that much chaos and still walks into a room with that kind of ease. But that's the thing about stories. The best ones are slightly unbelievable, and yet they feel true. My name is Jack Nicholson. I came from a secret, I lived in the center of a spotlight, I danced with madness on screen so other people wouldn't feel so alone in theirs, and then I walked off stage to spend the last act of my life in relative quiet. The roles will keep playing long after I'm gone. The man will fade, as all men do. But somewhere, forever, a screen will light up, and there I'll be, raising an eyebrow, cracking a smile, telling you that you can't handle the truth, breaking through a bathroom door, ordering toast the wrong way, sitting in a mental ward, daring everyone to feel alive. And if you look closely, behind every character, you'll see a flicker of that confused kid from New Jersey, trying to figure out who he really is, and making the whole world watch while he does it.